Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to be doing a little deviation from fantasy. So as any of you who have been following the channel for a long time know, I read mostly fantasy and review mostly fantasy on the channel, but I like to read a wide variety of books. So every now and then I will hop in with another genre or another collection of books to talk about, just to spice it up a little bit, I guess, and get to talk about some things that I don't usually talk about. And I did a similar video to this a couple of months ago where I talked about the most accessible classics. And that wasn't necessarily a list of my favorite classics or the classics that I most enjoyed reading or enjoyed studying. It was a collection of classics that I thought would make a good introduction for someone who wanted to read some classics, but were worried about getting bogged down in either archaic language or stories that were difficult to understand, and ensuring that they would hopefully have an enjoyable reading experience. So today I wanted to do the same thing with a list of Pulitzer Prize winning books. If anybody's been following the channel for a while, I think it may have even been around a year ago, but I'd have to go back and look at the actual video. I did a video about literary lists and awards. Just asking the people who watch the channel if they enjoy keeping track of who wins which literary awards, whether that is in the sci-fi fantasy realm, whether that is for literary fiction or young adult fiction. Are there any of those awards that you follow and ones that you like to read from? And for me, I talked about those literary lists and awards being really helpful for genres or categories of books that I don't have as much time to read from. So from fantasy, because I read so much of it and I watch so many fantasy-oriented booktubers, I feel like I'm really abreast of what is happening in the fantasy community, what types of books are coming out, and I'm able to curate a list of things that I want to read fairly easily. But for other genres that I enjoy, like literary fiction, I am not as on top of what's happening in that publishing scene. So certain literary awards can be really helpful for that. And the Pulitzer Prize is one that I do tend to follow. And I do have a checklist of the award winners, and I like to go back and work my way through that list. So I have read a fair number of Pulitzer Prize winning novels. And I thought I would curate a list of 5 of those for anybody who would like to take that dip into literary fiction and maybe find some books that they would enjoy reading. Again, this is a list that has been curated in terms of its accessibility. So I tried to go with books that I felt like had a writing style that flowed very well, was not too intricate, too postmodern, too difficult, not something that you'd have to feel like you were really working at. Some of us really like that, but I don't think that we could call it accessible. I think we could call it enjoyable or rewarding, but maybe not accessible. So these are some books that I'm hoping would be fun, enjoyable reads if you wanted to pick something from this sphere. I have selected 5, which is what I did for classics as well. And for the purposes of the video, I'm just going to go through them in chronological order. So the very first one that I'm going to talk about is, if you have read a book from this list, then this is probably going to be it. And that is the prize winner. I think it's for 1961. I just had to check my notes there for a second. So the 1961 Pulitzer Prize winning book was To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And this is on so many high school or even junior high school reading lists that most people don't escape their formal education, at least in North America, without having read it. And this is a good one to start with because in terms of accessibility, this is probably like, quote, the easiest novel to read in terms of prose style and approach. This is a book for anyone who is not familiar that is set in rural Alabama in the I believe it's in the 1950s that it takes place, and it follows a young girl whose father is a lawyer, and he is assigned to help an African-American man on a case. I think he volunteers to help him. And it is about racial tensions in the southern U.S. during this time period. It is about parenthood. It is about childhood, and about discovering the kind of person that you want to be and the kind of person that you are. I think at the time that it was published, it was an instant success, an instant sensation, and I think had a white author exploring topics in a way that didn't happen very often. It's interesting to think about To Kill a Mockingbird, and this could be an entire video essay, this could be an entire series of talks examining what To Kill a Mockingbird means now in the context of 2022 versus the time that it was published, what it actually accomplished versus what predominantly white readers like to think that it accomplished. There's a lot of nuance and a lot of really interesting things to examine there. But at the end of the day, it does still remain a very accessible novel. It is definitely one of those like time capsule novels that can show you a lot about the prevailing attitudes at the time, especially of, Southern white authors. We need to remember to contextualize and remember who exactly wrote this book and, some of the reasons that they may have written it. But I do think that it does provide at least a lens into a certain type of thinking, a certain type of person living at that time. And this is what these lists really reflect. They reflect the literary criticism of the age. They reflect what resonated with people at the time during which it was published. And like I said, it is quite an accessible book. It is an enjoyable story. I think that it probably tends to trend closer to children's literature than adult literature, just because we are getting the story from the perspective of a child. It is pretty easy to dive in, and the themes are not incredibly nuanced. It's, there's not a lot of subtlety in To Kill a Mockingbird, but that doesn't mean that it isn't an enjoyable story, and it doesn't mean that it's not a heartwarming picture of a father and a daughter and watching how people struggle to reconcile the various facets of those who live around them. So if you have not picked up To Kill a Mockingbird, I think that it is an incredibly accessible Pulitzer Prize winner, and it's probably a great place for you to start. Shifting gears a little bit, we're going to jump forward a couple of decades. And the second book that I want to talk about is The Color Purple, which was the award winner in 1983. And to contrast this with To Kill a Mockingbird, this is a book that looks at an African-American woman who is living in the early 1900s in the southern United States. So a similar time scale, although this story starts earlier than To Kill a Mockingbird, and similar geographical area, but a very different perspective. So obviously this was written by a Black author, and this is a more intimate story than To Kill a Mockingbird. This follows one woman's journey, and we obviously see the characters who come in, the people who interact with her, who intersect on her life, and it is heartbreaking. It's really, really tough to read. It is a sad read, but it is so vibrant and so lifelike. The main character in the story will stick with you for years and years after you read it. This is another book that has a pretty accessible writing style. It's told in a series of letters where the main character is writing letters to God about the hardships that she's facing, the things that she's going through in her life. And it's so raw and emotional and powerful. It is a beautiful book. There are other books by Black women from similar time periods that are similarly poignant, that are similarly heartbreaking, and that I think are probably a little, in terms of like literary enrichment or technical style, are probably more rewarding to read from an academic perspective, but I think that they're a little bit tougher as well in terms of that literary, if we look at this through like a literary analysis gaze. But The Color Purple is very accessible. It's very easy to read. You get through it very quickly, as long as you can make it through the content, because it can be a very emotionally taxing read, but I think that it's a really important story to read as well. So it is definitely amongst the Pulitzer Prize winning novels that I have read. It's probably the one that still stands out the most vibrantly for me. I really, really enjoyed it, and it is one that I will definitely reread in the years to come. And then the third book that I have on the list is the 2011 Pulitzer Prize winner, and this one is called A Visit from the Goon Squad. So A Visit from the Goon Squad is quite different from the last two books that I've talked about, which makes sense because it was published, in 2011, so many decades after the second book that I have chosen. And the style is definitely different. This has a very quirky, if you read up on the book, I think literary critics have referred to it as a postmodernist book. Now, what that means in terms of literary criticism will take someone other than me to really break down and explain. But I think the author uses a bunch of different literary styles and techniques. There is a PowerPoint presentation that's part of the novel at some point. So I think there was a lot of that kind of 2000s era experimentation that was going on in this novel, and I really enjoyed it. When I read it close to when it was published, so that's about 10 years ago now. I remember just thinking that I loved the style, I loved the chances that the author was taking, and the themes that the author explored really resonated with me. So this is a book that is a bunch of intersecting stories. So if you think of holiday movies like Love Actually, where you get these disparate stories that all tie together through some central characters and you're not really sure how they all come together until the end. That's a little bit like the style of A Visit from the Goon Squad. So most of these characters in the book are tied together through I can't remember if he's a music agent or a record producer, but someone in the music industry. He is an aging man in the music industry. And a lot of what the novel touches on is the theme of aging. What does time steal from us? How do we change over time? And do we realize that those changes are happening? A lot about missed opportunities and disconnect. So disconnect from each other, disconnect from the realities of your life, a disconnect from the person that you are as opposed to the person you used to be. And I thought that it was a really interesting exploration. I know that Books with Brittany, who also likes to read a lot of literary fiction, read this earlier this year and did not enjoy it. So your mileage may vary. But I really like that kind of theme of nostalgia and time slipping away. I remember not liking the characters, as in not thinking that they were good people, but just being fascinated by the story, and just blown away by the ways in which we can be so utterly out of tune with ourselves or with reality. So I remember really enjoying this. It takes place on the backdrop of a record label and rock music, and also how that has shifted through time. So I also really enjoyed that aspect of the book. But for me, it was a bit of a change from some of the dry, really heavy, thematically driven Pulitzer Prize winning books that have been published. And I really ended up enjoying it. So I think if you like those themes, if you like books with that kind of nostalgic twist to them, then this might be a Pulitzer Prize winning novel worth checking out. Number 4 on the list is a book that was published, I think it was published in 2017, but is the 2018 winner, and that is called Less by Andrew Sean Greer, I believe the author's name is. And this was a book that really surprised me. Again, I read this one once the Pulitzer Prize winners had been announced for that year, and I was taken aback at how funny it was. Like, I've read a fair number of these books, and not many of them can you say are comedies at their core. So it was a surprising choice for me. At least I was surprised when this one was selected, and I really, really enjoyed it. This is a book about a gay man who is almost 50. I believe he's 49, like he's about to turn 50. And the man that he has been in love with for many, many years is getting married. So he gets an invitation to his wedding, and instead of attending the wedding, he suddenly RSVPs yes to a bunch of literary events that he usually goes through all sorts of trouble to avoid. So this man is an author, and I believe, again, like the details are not exact in my mind anymore. I believe he may have had like one successful book and is trying to write the next, or he's had like middling success, and he has kind of been too embarrassed to attend these functions in the past, but now he's doing everything that he possibly can to avoid this wedding situation. And so just says yes to this like around the world odyssey of literary events. And it talks about aging. It talks about the difficulty of losing your youth, and especially when you are used to spending your time with people who highly value youthfulness and appearance, and how that ties into your worth or your value as a person, and what it means when you are no longer the young and beautiful person that you used to be. What is left for you then? So it's an exploration of aging and sexuality. And the author of the book, when he was interviewed about the writing of this novel post winning the Pulitzer Prize, had said that he set out to write a really serious book about sexuality and aging and what that meant, and felt that he could not write it without making fun of himself. And it was only when he was able to make fun of himself that he found himself actually reaching that genuine emotion and those genuine feelings that came out when he explored that topic. So I think that this is a really heartfelt addition to the list. It made me laugh, and I just thought it was interesting. It was just a romp. Like, I remember flicking through it and being like, this is a lot of fun. This is a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. And I really enjoyed it for that reason. So if those are themes that you're interested in, if you like your books to have a more humorous element and you're looking for this type of novel to dive into, then I absolutely recommend Less. That was one that I really, really enjoyed. And then the very last novel on this book is, I mean, it's hard to say which is the most difficult in terms of subject matter, but this is another really hard-hitting award winner, and that is the 2019 selection, which is called The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. So Colson Whitehead is interesting because he has actually been a multi-year winner of the Pulitzer Prize. There are very few, I think there might be 3 authors who have won. I know that John Updike won several times, but I think that there's another author who has won more than once, but I would have to verify that. That is not in my mental file of facts, but I believe there's been a couple of other people, but definitely the most recent multi-award winner is Colson Whitehead, and he won for The Nickel Boys in 2019. And so not only is this book really sad, it is extra sad because it is based on a true story. So this is a book that was inspired by the story of, I think it's called the Dozier School, which was a reform school that was run out of Florida for more than 100 years. And it focuses on the lives of 2 young Black boys who are put into this school for different reasons, and the experiences with abuse and assault and fear and friendship that they have in this reform school. And it is absolutely heartbreaking. It is one of the saddest books that I have ever read. It's very short. So if you're looking like in terms of accessibility, this is one that you could read in a sitting. You may need to take several because there's a lot of parts that are just very emotionally draining to get through, but it is very much worth reading. And I think the fact that this comes from a true story, this is something that was inspired by a real events that occurred, I think that it's very much worth reading, and it is very much worth your time, but it is a sad one. So just go in knowing that, be aware that this is going to be a hard-hitting book, but if you're in the mood for that kind of like hard-hitting literary fiction that can help you discover more about the world and understand the hardships that may have led to the ways that we live our lives, the struggles that some people continue to go through, then I think that this is a really good place to start. And I thought it was incredibly moving. So I had a really good time reading it. I read it for a book club actually, and we had a great time discussing it, but I think everybody agreed that it was really difficult to get through. But those are my 5 selections. Like I said, these are not necessarily my favorite Pulitzer Prize winning novels, although some of them are. But these are ones that I think are incredibly accessible. I think that they deal with pretty universal themes. I think that the writing is usually pretty accessible, and it is not difficult to get into the meat of the story and what the author is trying to convey. Obviously, I would love to hear from any of you if there are Pulitzer Prize winning stories that you have really enjoyed, that you think are good places for people to start, or ones that are just your favorites of all time. If you like reading from certain literary lists, please let me know which ones you tend to pick from. And if you set a goal for yourself, like if you're going to read one a year or one a month or anything like that, I would love to hear from you. And I will see you with another video soon. Bye!